Guys, GaMing has the potential to be an absurdly powerful character, but this power of his comes with a lot of ifs and buts that are important to understand, so you set your expectations right. First of all, let me make one thing very clear. If we compare GaMing to other 4-star characters at the same constellation level, he is always very impressive. To the point that, to me, a Constellation 0 GaMing is easily comparable to Constellation 6 4-star carries. Like, for example, Constellation 6 Furina that came out this year, to me, is pretty much comparable to a Constellation 0 GaMing numbers-wise, and this, again, is very impressive. But when it comes to building 4-star carries, people are mostly skeptical to do that, because for the most part, even at Constellation 6, they're not quite comparable to the strong 5-star carries, so there is no point from a meta perspective. When compared to Constellation 0 5-star characters, a Constellation 0 GaMing, to me, is mostly comparable to the average to below average ones, like for example Eula, the Eula range, which by all means is still quite surprising, because this is a Constellation 0 4-star competing with Constellation 0 5-stars, so how can it not be surprising? But someone might argue, what point is there in building GaMing if it's not as good as my Hu Tao, my Line? Fair, I guess. So, how much do you need to spend to get GaMing to that level? In terms of damage increase, imagine GaMing's constellations as this nice straight line that goes up and up constantly until Constellation 5. Actually, it takes a little bump at Constellation 3, but then at Constellation 6 it goes. This is nothing really surprising, because unless we're talking about something like Radiant's Constellation 6, it's just obvious for a Constellation 6 to be that good. But I just want to clarify that if you want to boast to the Hu Tao mains, to the Alhaitham mains, to the Ayaka mains, Line mains that you have this character named GaMing, you probably will need the Constellation 6 to do so. And the issue with this is that at first it will cost a lot. Since 4-stars have no specific PT on banners, it can cost you anywhere from 7 pulls to an infinite amount of pulls, honestly. The advantage with 4-stars is that since they're technically available on any banner, you can slowly build them up to Constellation 6 without going ham on their first banner. But if you want to get a Constellation 6 GaMing right off the bat, the average realistic expense will roughly be the same as getting a Constellation 2 5-star. So for this discussion, it kinda puts a Constellation 6 GaMing in a competition where it's not facing Constellation 0 5-stars anymore, but a Constellation 2 5-stars. And the funny thing here is that even compared to that level of investment, it doesn't really look that bad. Yeah, is that good, I guess. But at the same time, is clearly not overpowering the Constellation 2 5-stars. And when it comes to fairly ranking how good he is in regards to the meta, I think this is what makes the most sense. So comparing him to Constellation 2 5-stars when he is a Constellation 6. Because again, comparing him to a Constellation 0 5-star really doesn't make any sense from an expense perspective. It would be like comparing a Constellation 2 5-star to a Constellation 0 1, which is clearly ridiculous. But still, it's so nice to finally have a 4-star carry that can actually compete with the heavyweights meta-wise, so it's all good. Before I move on, I want to let you know that I'm currently collaborating with Genshin Star. This website is honestly pretty nice for any Genshin player, because it sells clothing, accessories for your home, toys and so on, all decorated through Genshin related elements. You can buy on this website by using my coupon code TGS that will allow you to get a 10% discount on everything you buy. So yeah, definitely buy from it so your favorite theory crafter also gets some money through it. Teams-wise, not much has changed compared to the first video I made about GaMing, because luckily, contrary to popular expectations, they didn't nerf him, so his situation is mostly the same. A really important thing about him when it comes to building a team around him is that he really wants to amplify his hits with amplifying reactions like Melt, Vaporize. While this might sound kinda obvious because he is a pyro character, so of course he'd like to trigger those reactions, it actually isn't. GaMing is a quite unique character because in his kit during his rotation he only has a few hits, like he can only use his elemental skill about 4 or 5 times, his burst once, and that's basically it. Unless you play him on teams like Xianyun where you can also plunge with him without the elemental skill, but that's another thing. but like regularly he only has around 5 or 6 hits per rotation, and all of these hits have no internal cooldown. Practically this means that all of his damage is condensed in this 5 or 6 hits window, and if you're not triggering amplifying reactions on these hits, you're basically missing out on doubling his damage output. So basically it's kinda like Hu Tao, in the sense that if you're not putting him on amplifying reaction teams, he's losing a lot. His main options are vape teams, since that's where he can actually be paired with somebody like Furina, so the new meta breaker, and these teams perform very well. Compared to the first video I made, the Xianyun based teams, so the ones that have Furina, Xianyun, Bennett, and GaMing are better, because Xianyun got pretty significantly buffed, and I also introduced new combos in these teams. Specifically, a character like Xianyun allows you to use more plunge attacks with GaMing compared to other teams, because even though GaMing can innately use plunge attacks through the elemental skill, these hits have relatively low frequency. Since you have to wait a few seconds between each elemental skill cast for GaMing, during those windows you can simply use the plunge attacks Xianyun allows, and that's more damage for his combos. Obviously though, you need Constellation 6 Bennett to do this, because otherwise you will just be doing physical plunge attacks, because GaMing doesn't have Pyro Infusion on his normal attacks. On this team, just like on other Xianyun teams that have a Pyro unit in them, you can actually amplify the damage by triggering a Pyro Swirl, but it's a tricky setup and also mostly only works in single target situations, so even though the damage looks very nice, it shouldn't be that practical realistically. Alternatively, you can use Kazuha, who is a nice replacement to Xianyun. The combo is kinda different here, because of course you're not doing those extra plunge attacks, but the damage is still pretty nice. Here there is much more of a need to actually swirl Pyro with Kazuha, because the baseline damage is lower compared to the Xianyun teams, so if you can pull off that very quick setup where you use elemental skill and burst with Bennett, then you go in with Kazuha and use a quick skill, you will just swirl Hydro, and that's just much worse for the damage. Alternatively, you can also go with Sucrose instead of Xianyun and Kazuha, but she's kind of a worse alternative all around, because she has the same clunkiness Xianyun has when it comes to Pyro swirling, while not offering anywhere near the same benefits, so it's just worse. Options that don't include Xianyun become better if you also don't use Furina on the team, because Furina naturally favors the presence of a healer on team, so Xianyun looks better there compared to a character like Kazuha, but if you use a Hydro character like Yelan or Xinqiu, then the situation evens out. But honestly, these vape teams don't look that great. The reason is that you need to use the Hydro skill and burst at the start of the rotation, because otherwise there is just no practical time in the rest of the rotation windows. So if you do that with Yelan, since her burst only lasts 15 seconds, it will not last enough to guarantee vapes for GaMing for the full rotation. Xinqiu is a better alternative because he has better uptime compared to a character like Yelan, so you can guarantee more vapes with GaMing, but since he doesn't offer the same buffs Yelan does, the results are still not exciting. Goes without saying that to use either of them, you need to use a normal attack before each plunge with GaMing, and that's also not great for him, like for his combos. And also, you're not triggering nearly as many coordinated attacks by Yelan and Xinqiu on this team, since the cumulative amount of normal attacks is just not that high. It would be just like 8 or 9 per rotation, so their damage is just massively lower compared to Furina, and they also don't provide the same benefits in terms of buffing or vape enabling. So, are you totally screwed if you don't have Furina? Not quite. The Rosaria melt teams I talked about in the last video I made are still pretty strong, nothing has changed, and they're a good replacement to the Furina variants, although they're not quite as good as the Xianyun teams in general. This is a team where Kazuha definitely becomes more important than usual, because you really need his burst to absorb cryo in order to have a consistent melt rotation. Conversely, there is more emphasis on GaMing's constellations here, because he's just doing more of the team damage, so if you don't have constellations on him, it will just look bad. Alternatively, you can also go with the Monopyro teams, Chevreuse teams with GaMing, But again, if you're not triggering amplifying reactions on his hits, you're just losing a lot of potential damage. So basically, it could be said that aside from the main themes, Furina is probably the most important character for GaMing overall, even over Xianyun. Builds wise, the situation is pretty interesting when it comes to the weapons specifically, because he doesn't have a signature option like a signature 5-star. So since he lacks his signature weapon on him, even the best 5-star options are just comparable to the very good 4-stars rather than being standouts. These best 5-star options would be the Verdict, the Beacon of the Red Sea, Redhorn, so all of these 5-star weapons that have a great secondary stat but a pretty bad passive for him overall. So even cheap options like Rain Slasher or straight up free-to-play ones like Tidal Wave or Mailed Flower are pretty comparable and good compared to the 5-star options, which in a way is great because it makes it more free-to-play, but on the other hand, it just means that his seeding is more limited compared to 5-star characters that have a clear signature weapon. Artifacts-wise, the Mana Shusei set is the best option, but something like the Crimson Witch set is also very competitive. Gilded Dreams is also very nice for teams that have amplifying reactions, so you can also pick that. Honestly, just pick whatever has the best substats for you. And with this, I'm done for today. Peace!